Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Adam Shepherd.
Welcome to the ITPro Podcast, your weekly guide to the most important topics in the IT industry.
So Jane, happy Spotify Unwrapped Day.
Thank you very much. What is Spotify Unwrapped Day?
Spotify Unwrapped Day is the day that Spotify launches its annual Spotify Unwrapped package, which is basically when they take your listening data for the past year and extrapolate the trends in your music tastes from that. So you get a little digest of what your top songs are, your top artists, the top genres you've listened to that year, the stuff that you've had on repeat the most, stuff like that. It's super interesting, both for getting a kind of deeper look into your own music tastes, and it's also a really fascinating use of customer data to actually benefit the customers and give them a bit more insight. It's a fascinating case study in how to do data analysis well.
I guess it's kind of almost a quantified self-type thing, but with music. Although I'm thinking, would I be surprised to learn that I'm a secret fan of country and western as opposed to the alternative stuff from like the 90s and early 2000s that I think that I'm a fan of?
Yeah, mine is regularly much more embarrassing.
I'm also a big fan of 1970s disco, so, you know.
Wow, okay.
There you go. You learn something about me every single episode.
Yeah, mine is regularly quite embarrassing. Despite me, liking to think that I'm into quite a broad range of cool quote unquote music. My top artist this year was, I'm ashamed to admit, Real Big Fish, which is not exactly the coolest band in the world.
Indeed. Well, later on, we're going to be speaking to Thomas LaRock, who is head geek at Solarwinds, about how to build a data-driven business. But first, let's talk a little bit about the news.
So the biggest story from this week is that Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the famous co-founders of Google, are stepping down from Google's parent company as joint CEO.
Yes, so Alphabet is the parent company of Google. Google had a bit of a rearrangement of its structure in 2015, and the Google part of the business remains as sort of the search and ads kind of thing. Alphabet is the overarching umbrella that also incorporates things like DeepMind and other things that you think of as being Google companies, but they're actually Alphabet. At that time, Sundar Pichai took over as the CEO of Google, but like you say, Larry Page and Sergey Brin stayed on as co-CEOs of Alphabet. But that's a fact I'd actually forgotten until this news story came out. The fact that they were stepping down I was like, I thought that already happened. It was a bit of it took me a moment to realise that actually no, that it wasn't exactly the same thing had happened.
Yeah, they've been out of the public eye for a while, but this is the first time that they will have stepped away pretty much completely from the day-to-day operations of the company. They're still staying on as board members, but in their own words, they want to assume the role of quote-unquote proud parents, offering advice and love, but not daily nagging, which they said in a joint letter announcing their departures.
So Sundar Pichai, who, as I said, was or indeed is CEO of Google, will now also be CEO of Alphabet. So once again, an obvious choice in my opinion.
So aside from that, we have had a lot of news this week coming out from AWS reInvent in Las Vegas.
A lot of news, a torrent of news, if you will. Our colleague Bobby Hellard, who we had on the show last week, is out there. But one of the most interesting things to come out of it, there's been a lot to choose from, but is Amazon CodeGuru, which is kind of like Grammarly for code.
Yeah, it was referred to by tech journalist Scott Carey as Grammarly for code. And essentially that's what it is. It's kind of like a spell checker for commits. It's not the same as a syntax checker.
Because that's how it first struck me when we were talking about it.
So what it is it's a system where you can tag it in commits, and when you submit those commits, it will essentially check it for errors, but also for inefficiencies in your resource utilization.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so what it can do is it can identify areas of your code which are not as optimized as they could be, and will suggest remediations to help you bring that efficiency up.
This is kind of where AI and machine learning really come into their own. Humans can be as analytical as you want them to be, but a machine at the end of the day is going to look at it and, effectively, without bias, depending on how you apply it, you look at it and go, oh, actually, this could be done like that. It's basically maths. So, yeah, this is an excellent application of automation, in my opinion.
Yeah. So this is based on Amazon's internal tools. They've been using it internally for a number of years, both AWS and the rest of the Amazon ecosystem, if you like. So it bases its reviews of code on like 10,000 lines of Amazon's internal code, as well as numerous open source projects.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. I think, like I say, this sounds like it's going to be very helpful, but more helpful than, like I said, just sort of a syntax checker or a multitude of tools. To have everything all in one place is going to be pretty handy. Internal
teams at Amazon have had great success with this. Some teams, according to reporting, were able to increase their CPU utilization by more than 325%, and at 36% lower cost.
Those kinds of figures I'm always a little bit skeptical of, but if that's the way it works out, then great, and hopefully for other end users that will help them achieve figures even in the region of that. Okay, and for our final story, have you heard of a guy called Pablo Escobar?
Rings a vague bell. I reckon I saw a TV show about him or something one time.
Yeah, some kind of like drug lord in Colombia or something. I know, he had loads of hippos. Anyway, his brother is by far the more interesting person now, because he has released the Escobar Fold 1.
Yeah, it's a foldable phone that comes to us from the estate of Pablo Escobar. It is, as you might expect, gold. And somewhat tacky in design,
but incredibly affordable for the specs.
It's weirdly well spec'd. It's got some really high end components, and it only costs like $350.
Yeah, so stainless steel finished in gold, so it's not actual gold. It's got an 8th gen Snapdragon chip, a 7.8-inch AMOLED display, and it folds out into a full-size tablet. Nobody quite knows whether or not this is going to be widely available or effectively a special edition. The company previously released a flamethrower, which had a 20,000 unit production run. So
it's also worth noting that Roberto Escobar and the Escobar company took Elon Musk to court over said flamethrower, alleging that Musk and his Boring company stole the idea and design for the flamethrower for their promotional quote-unquote not a flamethrower, which generated quite a bit of attention.
Yes, should you wish to get your hands on the Escobar Fold 1, we don't have on sale details. However, you can check itpro.co.uk for more widely available foldable phones and otherwise for smartphones.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be talking to Thomas LaRock from Solarwinds about building a data-driven business.
See you after the break.
Hello, I'm Ollie Mann, and every Friday on The Week Unwrapped, we cover the stories you might have missed with journalists from theweek.co.uk. It's all the big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. That's The Week Unwrapped with me, Ollie Mann, available now for free from all good podcast apps.
Welcome back, and now we are joined by Thomas LaRock from Solarwinds, who is one of their head geeks. Hi, Thomas.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So, data is obviously one of the biggest topics in modern IT and modern business in general. But it's not always easy to get started with kind of data and using data as a business, particularly if you don't necessarily have a background in it as a business. What do you think are kind of some of the primary challenges that businesses face when they're looking to kind of become data enabled, if you like?
Yeah, so data enabled, data driven, or I kind of prefer data informed. And I think really the biggest challenge is that many companies these days are kind of doing it backwards. They're antiquated in how they've started for many years. They already have this idea of doing some data mining. And so we have a set of data, we have customer data, say, right? And so they've gotten used to doing some analysis. And the problem is, over the past 20 years, the proliferation of data has grown. It's exponential. The volume that comes at you from everywhere, structured and unstructured, that those traditional data mining techniques aren't able to keep up. So it's the biggest challenge is getting a company to understand that the way you've been doing things for decades is now inefficient and possibly wrong and maybe even harmful. So to me, that's step one, is you've got to acknowledge that what or how you've been doing things for 90% of the companies out there isn't going to work anymore. And that's why I think we've seen a rise of data science and ML and things of that nature, because those have been built and sold as a way for you to get insight and value from this volume of data. So that's what you've got to overcome just to begin with. You've just got to sit in the room and say, okay, let's just admit. That's always the first step, admitting you have a problem. And so that's what has to happen. Those companies have to admit, we've got to rethink how we approach our data analysis.
I mean, obviously, one of the big ideas at the moment is digital transformation. Is this an important part of digital transformation? Or, when you're talking about people doing things backwards, are they focusing on this and then kind of going, we're supposed to be doing this as well, and just throw some tech at this problem and see what happens?
Well, so to me, digital transformation is one of those made-up marketing terms. Nobody really knows what it means, and everybody kind of applies a different meaning to it. So, yeah, I think there's some sense of my digital transformation is that I'm going to use more data and analysis in my day-to-day business. But honestly, can you tell me what was digital before and what's it being transformed from and into? It's digital, right? It's data, it's bits. So I don't know what they're transforming. I don't know what they're building. I don't know who decided to slap that term on there, but it actually makes no sense to me. We were just talking about data and companies that have data and needs, and they want to do some analysis on it in order to gain insight and get an edge on the competition.
I think for me, one of the big issues around this area is companies not really not having a clear idea of what data they have, and B, why they have it. I think there tends to be in a lot of companies a tendency to they've heard that they need to become more data informed, as you put it, and they need to be making more use of data and doing more with data. So they just go, right, we're just going to amass as much data as we can. We're going to kind of collect it from every single source and data stream that we have available, and then we're going to question mark. And they don't really have any idea what they want to do with the data that they have, or why they're collecting the data that they are. What are the kind of the main areas that companies need to focus on when they're planning their data strategy?
Well, I think you've touched upon a lot of the problems that a company has, say, with that digital transformation. The first thing they have to know is, what's the business objective? What are we trying to do here, right? So if you don't know your business objective, then how do you know what data you're supposed to be collecting? So yes, there's a tendency to go out there, just start collecting as much data as possible. We'll make sense of it later. Well, let me ask you a question. Have you heard of a little thing called Gdpr? So you might not want to be collecting some of that data, because then you might find yourself in a situation where you're in violation. So these days, collecting all the data could be very much the wrong move to make. So you only want to collect the data that is necessary at a minimum to meet the business objective. So step one, if you don't know the business objective, then stop collecting whatever you're collecting right now.
How would you advise firms determine what data it is that they actually need? How do you determine this business objective and then go about collecting the data?
Well, one way that I see a lot of companies do is they set up a sort of a data governance council, so to speak. So you have some sort of oversight. You've got to have somebody in charge, we'll call it a steward, right? Somebody that's in charge of the data for the organization. I think the number one thing what you'll find is that because a company of any decent size, they operate in silos. And what you find, there's a company out of Chicago, I forget their name, but they specialize in coming in and helping you understand if more than one employee is purchasing the same set of data. Because somebody at a higher level is just writing a check for this. And they're like, wait, did we really just pay twice for the same data set? And surprise, you are, because you have no oversight for the data to begin with. So if you have that type of steward or governance, not only can you sort of figure out what data you are collecting, then you can figure out why you're collecting it. How does it tie to a business objective or not? So maybe we don't need that data. And then once you have it, well, what are we going to do with it? And can we track it? And then you can start and have hope to have that single source of truth when it comes to the data. Because the idea that the data you're looking at is pure and has been untouched and not manipulated in any way, right, that's just false. You know somebody has manipulated it along the way, looked at it, touched it. Can you recreate who's seen and done anything to it? If you can't, then you've got to accept that whatever you're looking at may not be true.
And you mentioned GDPR. There's also other considerations, the California Consumer Privacy Act. Companies that have been hoarding data prior to these things coming along, so people who think big data means just having a whole bunch of data sitting either on your own data center or on the cloud. How can they, I guess, kind of retroactively filter through what they've got and chuck out the stuff that no longer applies?
I think that's kind of asking, how do you eat an elephant? Right?
One piece at a time.
It's one bite at a time. I mean, if you don't have an idea of what you currently have in store, right? If you don't have the inventory, it's kind of hard to say, how do you know what to throw out? So the first thing is you got to figure out what you have, and you got to figure out what you need. I make it sound kind of basic, but it really kind of is. If you don't know what you have, if you don't know what you need, you don't know what you're doing. It's like, how do we even make money around here? So you got to come back, you have the business objective, and say, all right, what's the data we need for that? And go down the line for all those business objectives you have, all the data. Everything else after that, I'd say, get rid of it. In the days of GDPR, I don't want that data. I want nothing to do with that anymore. I want as little about you as all. I would rather run a business that would not take credit cards simply so I could avoid the issue of storing credit card information. Right? Now I got to fall under a different set of regulations and compliance. Imagine if I could just say, no, there is no credit cards. Cash, check, money order, that's it.
One of the kind of unexpected benefits of GDPR, from my perspective, was that it forced a lot of companies to actually think a bit more about how they were using data. And I think a good example of that for me is a lot of companies drastically culled their email marketing lists in the run-up to GDPR, went through, kind of repermissioned their lists, looked at kind of who hadn't opened an email from them in more than, say 6 months, and just got rid of anyone that was no longer engaged. And a lot of marketing people at the time freaked out, kind of understandably, because they've just lost a huge amount of their database, and they've gone, how are we going to do email marketing if you've just cut like 2/3 of our list off? But the conversion rates from those cut down lists, it was a massively increased ratio, because the people that were on the lists were only people who were, active and engaged. And I think a lot of people didn't see that coming. It forced them to reevaluate how they looked at data.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, I think everybody knows email wins, right? The more emails you send and have a chance to send, the more sales you'll do. And it's because of that people just say, just get me as many names as you can, and we'll take care of the rest. So when you had to cut back like that, naturally but wouldn't you rather have happy customers? Wouldn't you rather have the engagement of that list and have people wanting to be there as opposed to just spamming people? Right? So I think with GDPR, and I wish the U.S. had something similar. I know California has their act, but that's one piece, right? We need something on our end as well. We need something globally in order to just protect your general privacy. Like, do you opt in or not? And know what that opt-in means. These are basic questions, but companies have been taking advantage of that for quite some time.
So shifting focus slightly, so far a lot of what we've discussed has been somewhat focused on kind of medium to larger enterprises that are already doing some amount of work with data and on data analysis and data science. I think there's a lot of smaller businesses who would like to start using data or who would benefit from using data more, but who don't really have a good idea of how to go about it without going out and hiring a data science specialist or, buying data warehousing services and all of this kind of stuff. Where can smaller organizations start with their data science journey in a way that isn't prohibitively expensive or involve a lot of hiring?
Well, I would sit here before you and tell you that the number one data analysis tool in the world is called Excel, and it is everywhere, and I would start there. The tools built into Excel and as an extension Power BI are where I would spend my time. You can get a considerable amount of value from those tools at very little cost. So that's where I would tell a small to medium company or a smaller company, like, how do I even get started? You use those tools in order to do the initial or rudimentary data analysis, like the starting point. That's just saying use the right tools, to which I say use the tools you already have. But that's only the start, because the other part of it is you need to develop sort of this ability to ask questions of your data. How do I even know that I'm asking the right question here? And that's not something that I think everybody is born with. I think you have to learn over time. For example, in my background, database administration, I've seen a lot of things where people say, need to make up data. There's a null value here. Well, I'll just make that a 0. Now you start changing, like I just told you, data changes. What you're looking at isn't really the truth anymore. So understanding that and asking a question and saying, wait, is this real? Was that a 0 begin with? Was it just an empty string? Was it this other? And understanding those little things. And that just comes with experience, right? So I'm throwing out one example, but yeah, you've got to be able to learn to ask the questions in addition to having the right tools.
So in terms of data sets, where should small to medium businesses start with data analysis? Customer data is the obvious kind of first point that jumps out in terms of trends and buying patterns and that kind of thing.
Well, I think that comes back to what are the business objectives, because once you know the business objective, then you can define the measures. So now you can collect, now you have your metrics, and now you're going to do the analysis on those metrics in order to say, all right, are we trending in the right direction? Little things along the way for me as a DBA, I'd be capacity planning. Are my backups growing in size? When will we fill up the disk, right? So there's always an area for you to do some sort of analysis on the metrics that you're collecting. But again, start with the business objectives, define the metrics that are necessary in order to have success, and then you're going to do the analysis on those metrics to say, are we trending? Is this the right thing to do? Now, if you want to get into the machine learning aspect, then it becomes building a model. Okay, do we have all the features that we need? Or maybe this feature isn't important anymore. We can stop collecting this thing.
Yeah, I think the machine learning aspect is quite an interesting one. Would you say that machine learning is at a stage now where it is worthwhile for customers or companies rather, aside from the kind of Fortune 500 level companies. Would you say we're at a stage now where companies are in a place where building their own machine learning models is going to be valuable to them?
Absolutely. But I think we've always been in that place. Machine learning is just a fancy way of building a prediction engine. And I think we've actually been doing that for centuries. I'm sitting in the home of, the financial capital of the world historically, right?
For now.
And for now. But I mean, who did insurance and bonds better than people in the city of London, right? So who sets the insurance rates? How is that magic done? How did you know how much to charge? Those are nothing more than predictive models. It took a lot of extra maths, as you would say. But so it's been done for centuries. It's just when we say machine learning, again, that's somebody putting a marketing term on this thing that they want to help you and say, this is the newest thing ever. It's not actually new. What is new is your ability to deploy it without having a degree in maths or an advanced degree in statistics in any way. And I think that's a great thing. I think every company should consider it, but not every company needs a model. But if you do, if you need to build a prediction, for example, what's the ideal customer look like for us? And how do we get them? These are basic questions you want to ask and say, well, could I predict with success that if I got a customer of this particular demographic that they would buy more or less? And again, these are the metrics you want to go into. But the example I just gave with, say, demographics, the problem with it, and the problem most people have with machine learning is that they're not experts. They don't necessarily know the right questions to ask when they're collecting the data. And then they build these models that have an inherent bias built into them. So do I think they should be doing it? Yes. But do I think you might want somebody with some level of experience in that level of data collection and machine learning? Absolutely.
So what do you think the next phase of data analysis is, say, over the next couple of years?
So what I'm hopeful for, because I came here to talk a little data-driven, data-informed type thing. What I'm hopeful for is that the next phase is that companies truly become data-driven. And what that means is they will let data play a part in the decision-making process. So when you get in the room and you're having discussions, people will bring data to the meeting instead of just their emotions, right? So when the company says that they're data-driven, that means the data drives the decisions they make. There are still people who they treat data-driven as, oh, I have an idea and I want this to happen. Now go get the data necessary for my idea to be correct. And so what I'm hopeful is that the future is, because everybody can do data analysis to some degree and level, is that there'll be many people in the room with the same data sets and they go, well, I have that same data, but the story tells me is slightly different than what you see. We should discuss what we're seeing before we make a decision. That's where I'd like to see for the next phase.
That's all we have time for this week. Thank you once again, Thomas, for joining us and for a fascinating chat about building a data-driven business.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to talk data. Well, you can find me at my blog, thomaslarrock.com/blog. I also sometimes tweet. The handle is SQL Rockstar.
Nice.
I know I'm blessed with a good last name, so I took advantage of that. And so I sometimes tweet, and it's usually my feed you'll see is data topics. I travel a bit, and of course bacon, which is a passion of mine. So if you're interested in those things, you can follow me there.
Well, you can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website, www.itpro.co.uk.
You can also follow us on Twitter at ITPro, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode.
We'd also like to give a special shout out to our staff writer Connor Jones, who is sadly leaving the ITPro family today. He is moving on to a new career, and we wish him all the best.
We'll be back next week with even more news and analysis from the world of IT. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.